All right, we are live. Hey, Sean, how are you today?
Great. How are you this week, Tiff?
You know what? I'm good. The week is going by pretty quickly, and I know you're planning for multiple birthday parties this weekend, so I'm sure yours is either going really quickly or kind of slow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, pretty fast and chaotic, but I like life that way, so it's okay.
I know, I hear you. We always like to complain how we mean just our society, how busy we are, but then on the other hand, when we're not busy, we're complaining about not being busy. So
Exactly. The grass is always greener, so I just keep moving and having a good time. I like to
perfect.
say, have a little fun along the way with whatever's going on.
I agree. I agree. I like that. Well, more importantly, though, today we are talking all about GitHub profiles. And I'm not going to lie, I feel like I am as much of a learner from this as I am speaking on it because my GitHub it's kind of rusty. Prior to at the last company I was a developer, we used a different platform than GitHub, so it was just kind of collecting dust. I wasn't doing much open source, so I'm really excited to dive into this today because your GitHub profile, I gotta say, I think it's really good.
Oh, well, thanks. But I also, as we were talking about covering this topic, I was thinking, I mean, I've covered some of the best practices, but there are a few that are missing. So I think this would be interesting to talk through. And the other thing I was interested to, maybe even before we get started here, is to get your perspective on. Well, I know you want to set it up, so I'll let you set it up, but I'll just leave this here, which is to say, why is this important? This is probably worth covering.
I like that. Let's start there. I think it's a good place to start. And to kind of further sideline this conversation, but still very important. I saw it. This was top of mind when I brought this to you that hey, this would be interesting to do because I saw a video on social media recently, and it was this individual being like, if your GitHub doesn't look like this, and it had, the it was activity was extremely green the whole way across and just perfect. No one's going to hire you. And then someone did a stitch of the video where they're like, well, some people don't use GitHub. There are other platforms out there. So it just really brought up a lot of, for me anyways, I was like, this is very interesting. And I think a lot of things, though, we're focusing on GitHub, but I think regardless of what platform you're on, a lot of these things can, to varying degrees, apply to it. But going back to your question, why is this important? I mean, I think for one, it's one of the first things that a potential employer looks at. So, how do you want to present yourself? What else would you add to that?
I think that's the main idea, that it's this. It is your developer persona. It's the public version of that. So you can say, you can put wherever you worked on LinkedIn and on your resume. But if you're going to go hire somebody, or if someone's looking to hire you, they're going to check out that GitHub profile. And I think I saw the tweet or post or whatever it was that you're mentioning,
Wait, you're
and
right.
I've seen that perspective before, and I disagree with it. But I think that there's like anything else, there's a happy medium. It's like, if
Agreed.
I'm looking to hire someone, and we'll talk about some of these things, I'm sure I do want to see some activity. But also, if I see that you wrote code 365 days last year,
Mhm.
I'm going to wonder, am I hiring a balanced person? It's good to take time off too. So, I think that anything we might cover today is, and like any advice, taken with a grain of salt, and trying to find the right balance in the thing that works for you and what you're trying to achieve out of it. But that you basically have this public space that is the representation of you and what you're capable of doing with code. And if you're looking to be a developer, or something where writing code is a significant portion of that job, then I think taking that public image very seriously it's going to be important for your prospects in what you can land.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And it's it's one of those things that it's kind of like a resume, as you were alluding to, in a way, its own version of a resume. And once it's the pain points is updating it once, like getting it to that point where it's really good. And then it's kind of for the most part, it's a well-oiled machine. But it just sometimes especially when we are, busy in our day jobs and life and all of this, we kind of we'll get to it. And then that day comes and it kind of everything piled up and you're like, oh, I got a lot of work I really need to dive into here. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
well, on that note, so how I was thinking of how to dive into this, and I thought it'd be really fun to just literally search up how, like, what is a good GitHub profile. I forget what exactly I searched up, or how to create an impressive GitHub profile. And this is just one of the first links that came up, and I thought it'd be interesting to go through it and see, if these are things that from past experiences that are how much we agree with it, or maybe things that we would add or take away. So let me share my screen here.
Okay.
Mhm. Right. You can see my screen?
I can. Yes.
Awesome. So once again, this is just one of the first links I clicked on. I'm sure this is a great site or whatever it is. I don't even really know, but I just thought it'd be
Yeah.
interesting.
What is the website?
It's called bestcolleges.com. Can you see my URL? Let's see here. Oh,
Yeah,
no, you
I
can't.
can't see the URL, but I can see. Oh, and BC boot camps. Okay, so so this is kind of right in line with what we were saying, because they're largely then going to be motivated on marketing individuals and how they market themselves to
Mhm.
get a job
Yes.
out in the world. And so that I'm guessing most of the advice here is going to be in you presenting yourself in a way that looks good to a potential employer.
Exactly, 100%. And I think too, you make a good point here, because I think too, when I was thinking about this topic, I was like, is this going to only be valuable for people who are just getting into the are more junior in their career? But I do think there is a lot of value, and it's even more important as you grow in your career, because oftentimes as you grow in your career, sometimes that's when we kind of get the maybe unintentional ego, if you want. Not everyone, but sometimes you do, and you just kind of say, well, I don't, my job experience on LinkedIn will speak for itself, or this will speak for itself. Where in reality, it's still very important as you continue to grow in your career.
For sure. For sure. Yep.
All right, I'm going to skip the first one, I think, or we can touch on it very briefly, which is pick a username. How important do you think a username is when you are creating a GitHub profile?
Well, I think that they are saying here include your name, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think that a lot of what we're talking about is, well, we mentioned being marketable and presenting yourself in a way that is um, that makes yourself look desirable to a potential employer. Now, that's not and like you mentioned, I totally agree. That's not the only reason. I don't do it for that. I'm not looking for a job. To me, it's a nice compliment to the writing and teaching that I do elsewhere, and it can help people discover example code. And I want it to be easy for them to navigate around my profile. I also want it to be easy for them to find my contact information so they can send me a message if they need to get in contact, have a question about a post, something like that. So it's not just about getting a job, but it all kind of falls under this umbrella of giving you this public persona, your developer self. And so I think being I keep talking about balance, but I think there's a balance between being you and also being professional. So you do
Mhm.
want to look professional and presentable, but you don't want that to wash away the character that makes you you. And I say that because they mention here that your username should have your name, and I don't agree with that, because your approach with your brand might be something totally different, and it can be a little weird and a little goofy, and that's okay. I actually think, and I'm curious to get your perspective, Tiff. I felt like it's probably better to be close to um, having parity among the various social platforms that you're on, so that if you are called something in some space, that someone can find you in this other space, versus using your name everywhere. And I know a number of folks who don't put their name at all in their usernames on any platform, but they're very consistent from platform to platform. And that was probably, they picked up some service during a time when we were saying, don't put your name because there's a security concern or whatever. And now it's just kind of an artifact of that. So I'm not saying there's a security concern or that using your name is a bad idea. I think I'm saying, personally, I find consistency and personality a little bit more appealing than specifically needing your name. But what do you think?
100%. I agree. I think, and it's also dependent on, maybe not fully, but if I was, I think a little bit, if you are, as you mentioned, someone who does have a persona online on other platforms, I do think it's important to match those, because maybe a potential employer is searching you. I mean, you would assume they'd go on LinkedIn as well, but say they're searching your GitHub and they're searching by that username that you have on other platforms, and it's not there because it's your actual name. So I think consistency is the main thing. And then also too, I think it's what you are using your GitHub profile for. So I know we're really covering a lot in this video, focusing more on using it throughout your career, for applying for your first job, your third job, whatever step you are in your career. However, for myself, when I chose mine, which is not my name, Tiffin Tech, well, it's my first name. The reason I chose it was because I wasn't just using GitHub for applying for jobs or to apply to jobs. It was also, at the time when I created it, I was pushing a lot of small projects that we were building on my YouTube to that channel. So for that, it was more so for the viewer standpoint kind of thing. So it is, I think you nailed it though. The main thing is consistency across the board.
And it translates to this profile picture for me as well. I think that they said it should be professional. And I just kind of have a stylistic photo that I really like that fits me. I don't know. It probably depends. It probably also depends. I think you hit the nail on the head. What are you trying to do with this profile? And then there are dimensions to that. Is one of the things, even if you're trying to get a job, where are you trying to get a job? It might be, if you're trying to go super corporate, probably you need a professional headshot. If you are using it for personal use, then it's probably okay if your photo is your dog, or that you don't have a photo, or that the character is sketched, or that it's more of a logo and less of a photo. Again, I pulled these two particular things, I pulled back into the brand. And I think establishing your personal identity and your personal brand on the web is important if depending on what you're trying to get out of this space, and that these two things should reflect what that brand is.
100%. And it's funny, Sean, you mentioned your profile picture. And when we were connecting, prior to me even starting at StackBit, when we were connecting through the interview process, I looked you up on GitHub, and what your I think it was green at the time, a green background, but same image with yourself, and then some trees as well, kind of overlaid.
Like superimposed on my bald head. Yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting how, and I mean, we could go deep in this, so I won't pull us down this rabbit hole, but through that alone, I made assumptions about you, and I'm sure employers do as well when they go on our profiles, such as, this individual must be pretty creative. This image is really creative. He superimposed the trees with himself and the background. He must like the outdoors. These are assumptions that I made about you. And then also to that, I thought, okay, he also must really prioritize things outside of work to really put an image there that's not going back to the super corporate. So I guess I'm sharing a little insight. I didn't seem that deep at the time as you shared out loud. There's a lot of assumptions that people make very instantaneously based on the photo we choose, which is a lot of pressure, it feels like.
That's a great point, but I had not thought about that. Yeah, that's I like that. I like that. All right, what else do we got?
Okay, so we have set your status is the next one. So if you're currently looking for a job, to indicate this, or if you're at a company, it doesn't say that necessarily in this, but or if you're at a company, indicating what company you work for.
Yep. So this is generally those. Can you do you have another tab you can open to show us?
Yes.
Um,
Back here. I'm gonna stop
so we can
sharing.
look at the
I'm gonna share
GitHub UI.
my whole screen. Okay, I apologize for a moment here. It's gonna be infinite of us.
Whoa, there we go.
You can see my GitHub right now, right?
Yes. Yep. And if you maybe maybe you want to do you want to pull up mine as
Sure.
well? Can take a look.
Mhm. Oops, I should have done this user. I'm just gonna click on.
There's a yeah.
There we
Okay.
go. There's the
So I think this all kind of we made a joke the other day that I need a new image now, or to cut my beard. These things are not in
image.
parody anymore. I felt like, and there might be other points that come up in this article, but as I was reading this particular point, which was at a bio, it felt to me like, okay, so the bio is underneath the follow button on the left
Mhm.
side, and then everything below that also is like, yes, where you work, your status, your social profiles, your URLs and all that. Again, it's just kind of like a another form of a resume, and that's why I feel like, sure, yes, fill that piece out and add some personal flavor to it, um but yeah, that it's like it's just a few things to share that gives a kind of a quick summary of you.
And I like how to you do a mix of both the professional, but then also to a little bit of personal as well, such as sandwich lover, but then also to helping developers build better websites. You kind of give a full picture in a few bullet points, really.
Yeah, yeah, yep. I like pulling a little bit of personality into the seriousness where I can, where it makes sense. Not all the time.
Exactly. Perfect. All right, that goes to well, we kind of touched on this one as well, which is write a bio. Um,
Mhm.
so for your bio, for example, it's pretty, like we just said, it's kind of bullet points, and that's kind of how I typically see it versus more so complete few sentences in here. Is that how you typically see it, or?
Yeah, I think I wrote this at the time that I rewrote my Twitter bio. And
Mm,
so I don't know if I actually don't know if there's a character limit here or not, but I just made them the same at that time. And like all of these things, you want to keep them up to date somewhat if you can. It's really easy to forget about that. But I yeah, so that I don't know if there's a character account and you could do it, but I think I liked bullet points because it packs more information into a short space.
agreed. And it's just to the point.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
All right, next up we have feature repositories. Contains examples of coding projects. Programmers should post their own work to give a company's sense of their skill level and how programmers contribute and how they contribute to the project.
Yeah. So this is you can pin repositories to an account,
Do you have any pins?
and I
Oh, you
have just one, which is just my website, and I think I've changed this recently. I used to have a few more. They've been a little bit. I checked again recently, and they weren't super relevant. So um, I ditched them, but I think it's kind of a gut call in what makes sense. I do think that if you have work that you want to showcase
yeah.
publicly, this is a great place to do it. And this particular repo is the one that I work the most on. A lot of the other projects that I'm working on are either directly for a person and not really for the public,
Mhm.
or they're just quick examples. I could see there's a project I'm working on now that might eventually translate into something that share more publicly, and then I would add it up there. And so I really feel like this is the space to highlight everything, and it can be one, it can be, I think you can do up to maybe 6 or 8 or something like that. So just, whatever makes sense. Again, what would you put on a resume, and is it still relevant? I think there's some discrepancy there, and if you might want to put something on a resume because you did it, but nobody's going to interact with that code anymore today, in which case you don't need it necessarily to be pinned. You probably want that to be still active. And this, I made this assumption here, but also it should be public. And this is probably a whole other conversation, but I received what I thought was really good advice early in my career. And this senior dev said, do everything in public. If you have a project, just make it open source, put it on GitHub, make it public. It doesn't hurt anything. It's totally fine. And so I default to public, even when I'm working on a new idea. I just put it out there, make it public.
I love that advice. And I think our natural tendencies, or for many people anyways, is to, when you're learning something new or just starting in your career, is to make everything private because you're worried about being embarrassed or you're not certain about it, but just learn and build in public. I think that was one of the things when, now we're going down a rabbit hole, but when I first got into tech, I was kind of took me off guard, how much people were open to exactly that, learning in public, failing in public, sharing ideas. It's really interesting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reality is, people aren't really going around and looking for code to critique or anything like that, which is why it's totally harmless to do it. I mean, I've even gotten a few pull requests on this website, and some of them I've merged in, but sometimes people are just going around doing weird random things on GitHub, and that's fine. And just close the pull request and give a relevant comment and move on. But in more than 10 years of following that advice, I haven't gotten into a situation where I've been okay. I was going to say I haven't gotten into a situation where it's been like embarrassing that this code has been out there, except for that one time when I accidentally published a secret key, and then someone charged a bunch of $1,000 worth of servers to my Amazon account. But Amazon helped me find that one and fixed that issue. So that's all right.
I feel like, honestly, and I'm not just saying this, I feel like that is at this point a rite of passage as a developer.
Oh yeah.
Classic story. It's a classic story.
Absolutely.
All right, this one is so important. Include README files. And even before diving into this, one thing I'll say is, okay, yes, it goes into it, but not just generating the standard README file, but actually putting some effort into it. I'm guilty for just not putting in effort, but then when I go to other projects, I'm like, why didn't they put effort into this? So this is very important.
Yep, and it's multifaceted here. I think that Tiff, you said something earlier, just like really that the context of what you're trying to achieve on GitHub can change the way that you approach what you're going to do. And I think that the same goes for a README. If the project is just for you, it can be public. So, but it's also, as a developer, really, and well, really as anybody, you leave work alone and then you come back a couple weeks, couple months later, it can be difficult to know what your past self was thinking or doing at that time. So it's not like you should spend a week documenting after you spend a couple days writing some code, but leaving relevant information in a README so that you can help yourself in the future when you come back to it, I think is really helpful. If it's a project that other people are meant to consume or run or whatever it might be, then the README should at least have the basic steps to get up and get running, a clear explanation of what the thing is. And, and then from there, it can vary based on what it is, how deep you go into documentation.
Yeah.
But the other thing that they mention here is something that I don't have, and I've been saying I need to do this for a long time. And this is that you can, I think it was maybe last year, 2 years ago, GitHub came out with the ability to add a README to your personal profile. So if you do this, I forget exactly how you do it. If you just Google GitHub profile README,
Yeah.
there will be plenty of examples on how to do it. But when you do, it shows up on the right side of the screen at the top. I think above your pinned repositories, you get basically a README that is just for you as a person. And so a lot of people are
Wow.
using that to expand on their bios, to basically be a resume, or to say what they're currently working on, or to put some sort of artwork, or something like that. But it's kind of this free space to take over in your profile, which I personally haven't done, but I've seen some people do it pretty well. And I was going to try to find an example. I don't have a good one right in front of me.
That is such great advice. I'm definitely going to, as I need to start updating my profile, I'm definitely going to take that advice away because I did not know that. So that's so cool. And it's such a great way to kind of stand out with a bit more information about yourself, or your, like you said, your resume, depending on what you're using the platform for. But regardless, just to put more information.
Exactly. Yes.
All right, next one is make contributions. Are you a big contributor to open source projects?
Not well. Let's see. Not in my free time or for side projects. I will say that, as I mentioned earlier, one, I try to do all my work out in the open. So my whole website and all the content for the website is open source. So I think in that regard, yes, doing a lot of open source work, content getting published every other day over there. Um, when I'm building freelance projects, I'm putting them in public if it is acceptable for the client. I'm pushing the client to do that. It's not always the case, but sometimes that happens. Again, I mean, in that, my website it's open. There are other people who have contributed to it. The client work is totally different when it's not going to accept contributions for that. It's more just a showcase sort of thing.
Mhm.
And then there's another piece of this, which is um, we have open source projects at StackBit, which
Yes.
includes content layer, but also some different projects in StackBit. And so all three of those are different flavors of work that is technically out in the open. The source is open. There are also different tiers of community being involved in
Mhm.
them. And those are all things that I'm regularly working on or have a hand in owning or managing.
Yeah.
The more classic open source approach, like, do I actually contribute to other people's repositories? I've done it a handful of times, and it's usually when I'm using some sort of tool that is it is solving 99 it's doing 99% of what I need it to do, and this other 1% is like pushing me to not use it, or it's basically like it's really, really close to being perfect for me, but it's not there. So I'm going to go probably suggest a change, and that's happened a few times. It's irregular for me. It might happen once every 6 months or so.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point you bring up though is, I mean, the class, it's not, I mean, if you, depending on how technical you want to get about it, but there is many ways to really be open source or contribute open source. And like you said, the classic way, of course, is going into, well, yeah, going into others' projects and doing what you just mentioned, but also to making your own projects open and enabling others to potentially contribute to them as well. So definitely a lot of, but I find that, and I find too that there are individuals who are open source contributors in the classic way you mentioned. There's that are they spend so much of their time in that format, or there's others kind of like what you just mentioned where you're building in public, you sometimes do the classic contributions, but through other ways as well. I feel like there's always one or the other. I rarely run into individuals where they say, I contribute to open source projects once a week or once a month. It's either you're really in the world of that or you're maybe not. But that's just my experience.
Totally, totally.
And that kind of brings us to the last one, which is contribute frequently, which kind of covers what we spoke about earlier. And I think also too, it kind of goes back to what I started this conversation with contributions. How many contributions have you made in the past year, or different things like that?
Yes, and I think that they have some. They're talking about days that you've contributed, and that's So here's the thing: the GitHub green matrix is really cool, and it's cool to see it light up, and it lights up more if you do more if you commit frequently, and which means smaller commits on more days of the year. However, and so it can look super impressive, right? Yes. But there's also, you can also fake that. I mean, it's really easy to fake it. In fact, some people just make meaningless commits just to fill up their matrix, which is so weird and inauthentic. And so, I think that it depends again on your circumstance, but I don't think about this as needing to be hacked in any sort of way. I think that the important part is to be active, and and usually smaller commits is better. It's just like it's good practice, but
there's that line.
there's a line, and smaller commits doesn't necessarily mean smaller pull requests. And so I think you just have to do what works for you, and don't overthink the rate of contribution. Just stay active.
Yeah. Stay active, and when possible, quality over quantity. If you're someone who is not, if you're a developer and you're not using GitHub or pushing to GitHub on the regular because you're using Bitbucket or any other platform, you might not have, it might not look as frequent on your GitHub, but then maybe something where it's like, even we talked about pinning a project where there's, a personal project that you've worked on that you're really proud of, or contributing to open source if that's something that you're interested in, different things like that. It doesn't necessarily directly reflect, I think what we're both saying is it doesn't necessarily reflect your skill level all the time as a developer, although it is important to show you are contributing. It's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Totally agree with everything you said. Yep.
Awesome. Sean, we're at time and we got through the list. This has been really great. I'll link your GitHub down below. I'll link mine down below, but like I said, I still need to implement a lot of these. I've been a little bit lazy, but this has been great catching up with you on this.
Likewise. Yeah, it could be an interesting exercise to go through that and then see what else did you come up with that maybe wasn't covered in that list during that process.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. Yeah. And that's a way to motivate me to actually take action on it. Because as you know, like sometimes life, when it comes to the weekend, I'm just like, okay, I just want to be outdoors or have a nap.
Yes. Exactly.
I'll see you. We're streaming live next Wednesday, so we'll see you all then.
Okay. See you, Tiff.